Hello and welcome back to the strategy course. Today we are going to be discussing local industry conditions constrained to a particular geographic space. And what I like to do is start with, in addition to trying to understand analyzing the industry, defining what is an industry, which seems to be kind of obvious, but there are some subtleties I'd like to get into. For that, let me go back a little bit to the logic behind analyzing the industry and some of the theory that is going to be under the hood, if you want, of the particular framework we are going to be discussing. And this is a story of traditional economics. Here we start with the very basic models, neoclassical models of supply demand, determining the price and quantity at which one particular product is going to be sold. The notion here, things to remember here, is to understand that these are nice laboratories for understanding the basics of competition. This is, if you want, the beginning of understanding industry, but we need to go much deeper into it. Why is this? Because the reality is that perfect competition is not something that we tend to see in reality. There are very few industries in which there is a level of perfect competition, because this requires a set of conditions that in many cases are not met. One single type of product that is pretty much a commodity, is well known by everybody. Lots of different producers, lots of different consumers, everybody has the same information, everybody has the same technology, everybody can transact with no cost, everything is kind of perfect. That's why it is called perfect competition. And the result is that it is nice, it is the basis for this, but there are lots of imperfections in markets that limit our ability to apply this logic. The reality, most industries, we are talking about imperfect competition, limitations to the market, quote unquote, determining prices and quantities. Some companies have influence on the ability of on the price or the quantity that is being sold. Some buyers, in some cases, also have this ability. And of course, there are the problems with information being imperfect, being their transaction cost, which results in some cases with industries that have a structure of monopoly. We have one single buyer or one extremely dominant buyer that, because that company dominates the market, is able to set a particular quantity and price, and everybody has followed. In the case that it is one single dominant supplier, was the previous case, one single dominant buyer, that's a monopsony, which is pretty much the same story, but flip side. And then we have, when we have an industry in which have a series of producers, a few of them that dominate most of the market, 4 or 5 relatively similar market shares, 15, 20%. We call that an oligopoly. These companies, whatever a company does is going to affect what other companies do, and there is going to be a reaction. If I drop the price, there might be a price competition. If I want to grow in the industry, I have to do it at the expense of other competitors who are going to react to my actions. And then what we have is the reality in the vast majority of industries, which is monopolistic competition, even those in which we have lots of different companies. In many cases, it's difficult to switch from one product to other, and other companies have created brands. They have created the perception that this is better for you as a customer, and therefore you're going to stay with me, and there is some wiggle room, if you want, in the price, or customers think that this is the better brand, I'm going to buy it, even though there might be something that has a lower price available. With this, we start getting into an understanding of how do we deal with competition and the logic behind the story of analyzing industries. What is the basic? We now go deeper away from neoclassical economics, more into industrial organization in structure, conduct, performance framework or paradigm. And the logic here is that if we want to understand how we can achieve profitability, the way to do it is first the structure of the industry, the context. In which industry are we operating? What is the structure there? Is it a monopolistic situation? Is this an oligopoly, perfect competition, or something close to that? Is there in monopolistic competition that enables me to then, if I'm running a company, decide my strategies? This is if the conduct that I'm going to be following. And based on this, my strategies and this type of structure in which in the industry structure in which I operate, I'm going to end up having higher or lower levels of performance. Typical story, perfect competition, everybody's equal. We cannot influence the prices. My strategy is pretty much follow whatever is in the market in terms of performance, very little above covering my costs. I am a monopolist because in an industry there is a monopoly. I am the monopolist. Isn't this great? I can basically set prices high so that I can get a lot of money in. I am a small company, fringe company in an industry in which there is a company that dominates the vast majority of the market. Can I find a niche so that I can basically compete or try to undermine this very high price of the monopolies? This is the way we think. These are examples. Understanding the context drives my ability to decide and implement certain strategies, and that results in profitability. This is the logic, and this is the logic of understanding industry. So let's go back to the beginning of the question, and what is an industry? Relatively simple definition, a set of companies, competitors, that are selling products, and this is important, perceived by customers as serving similar needs. And this is one, if you want, the challenges of identifying industries, because for the most part, our understanding of industries is based on the issues of technology. We tend to group, and this is the standard, one example is a standard classification industry, standards for classifying industries, NICE, SIC, I6, in which somebody has taken all the industries and then decided to pretty much group them according to some criteria. And this is, for the most part, product-based criteria. The example of on the right is how the different sectors are grouped. Agriculture, forestry, fishing and hunting is one group, mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction another, utilities another, construction another. There is a degree of substitution within companies operating in the industry. And to some extent, what we're going to see is that there is some connection in the value chain. So we start with the most basic, if you want, inputs, raw materials, energy products, into putting them together, building manufacturing, and then into retail, wholesale, and the sale to others, and then the financing and all the other services that come with that. It's a great initial way of doing things. The example that I have there is pretty much how Apple has been classified and the choices that you make. If you want to some extent, limitation is that it's driven by technologies. And as we discussed before, an industry is the companies are perceived by customers as serving similar needs, which gets into the what is the need that we are serving. And then if you are thinking about an example, consumers, entertainment. So which are the companies then competing in entertainment? Well, we can think of all the cinema producers and all the cinema being associated with that. And maybe we can expand it a little bit more. And then, well, it's not cinema, but also television. But then we can start pushing out. If I am a consumer, I'm pretty much choosing among different options. Yes, I can go to the cinema, or I can watch television. I can meet with some friends, go to a restaurant, and then all of a sudden, restaurants and cinemas are competing for my attention and, if you want, my entertainment budget. Or maybe what I like is go hiking, and I need transportation, and then all of a sudden it's a slightly different story in which we are competing not just cinema operators or movies or television, but against the restaurants and then against the transportation so that we can go into nature. This complicates ideas, and this is one of, if you want, the notions that we need to go deeper when trying to understand the industry. And that's, if you want, the first thing we need to do, which is define which industry are we going to analyze, how broad do we want to go, and that is going to drive all the industry analysis that we are going to do now, which is a logic, and this is important, coming from, and this the particular 5 forces analysis is coming from economics, is coming from industrial organization, and the logic behind this one is profitability is the objective of understanding industry analysis. Why is this? What we want to do is understand, is this a good industry to operate in? Is this a good industry to enter? Can we enter the industry? How is profitability being generated and captured by some of the companies? Could I potentially be one of them and keep some of this profitability for myself? One limitation, and this is important, of this framework is not a framework designed for a company to identify strategies. It is a framework for companies in different segments to identify what is happening. You can run the same analysis, and for different companies, the logic is that you are going to be analyzing similar variables. You can measure some of them, and then you should end up with similar conclusions. But it doesn't tell you what can you do. That depends on what you in your company have that enables you to basically find different areas or different ways of competing. We'll see that part of internal analysis of the company later on. For now, this is context, is the analysis of the industry. And what we're trying to do is profitability. How do we achieve profitability if within the industry, we are not competing against each other? There is very little rivalry. How do we achieve profitability within the industry if it is difficult for potential entrants to get in? How do we achieve profitability in the industry if there are very few substitutes for the products offered by the industry? How do we achieve profitability? Buyers and suppliers, pretty much if those two groups have little power to extract or negotiate the value that is created in the industry. So this is the story. Profitability is the goal. A good industry is the one in which we can achieve high profitability, and it's not going to be competed away by the other groups that are going to try to have an influence on what is happening within the industry. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. And then, an industry is good, yes, when there is very little competition. How can we analyze this? Let's get into Rivalry. Let's measure some of these dimensions. And do we have lots of competitors? Well, if we have lots of competitors, maybe this is approximating to perfect competition, and we already know that we are not going to be able to achieve high levels of profitability. If there is little growth, well, if I want to grow, I might have to grow at the expense of others. That might lead to more competition, and therefore is going to reduce profitability. If there are high exit barriers and somebody is not doing well, well, maybe they will continue operating instead of exiting, and that basically puts downward pressures on profitability. High commitment to the industry. This is the only industry I know to operate. My family has been here. We are associated with this. We continue with this. Therefore, it's kind of another barrier to exit. And if I don't really understand what is happening among competitors, I might just push certain strategies, and basically we end up with more competition. Price competition. This is the story that I don't want to get into price competition. What I want to do is that we're competing. We have a degree of monopolistic competition. People are buying on the basis of the features rather than pure price. If the products are very similar and there is low switching costs, customers can basically move to one to the other, and therefore all of a sudden I'm just dealing with price rather than service or brand and things like this. If there are high fixed costs, this is the story of economies of scale. I have an incentive to produce more because my per unit level is going to, the cost of the per unit level is going to be lower. Therefore, it's basically leads to more competition on the basis of price. And the same thing with capacity. If I can only start producing with a very large minimum capacity, that means that all of a sudden, if I want to extend, I can produce more, I reach maximum capacity in my plant, and then I have to create another plant which has a minimum capacity. It's a story again of fixed costs. All of a sudden, I have an incentive in that second plant to try to overproduce so that I can reduce my per unit cost. And then perishable products, which can be products or in some cases services. Yes, it's not only food in which I want to just sell because otherwise I have to throw it away, but also in some cases services. If I don't sell the hotel or the seat on this airplane today, that's gone. I have an incentive to for those that are not sold, basically drop the price so that I can fly with a full plane or I can have a full hotel, and that basically puts pressure, downward pressure for everybody else. And then non-price competition, am I able to, this is on the other side, am I able to basically not compete on the basis of price, but create a brand, create connections, create a level of emotional engagement with customers so that they're selecting me on the basis of what I offer rather than pure prices and then the other way, emissions of competition. How can I find ways to not focus only on price? And the idea is move away from price so that I can achieve profitability for me and also the average company can have profitability. This is great. We have very little rivalry in the industry because there are one company is fantastic, a monopolist, or there are a few oligopolies that don't try to compete each other, but there are other forces that might push prices down. There might try to compete away the value that is created in the industry. One of them is going to be new entrants. Oh, there is a lot of profitability in this industry. Fantastic. Why don't we start a new company? It's going to be good because, look, everybody's making a lot of money, so we also want to make a lot of money. How do we prevent this? Barriers to entry. It's nice, but it's difficult for me to start a new company in that industry. For example, economies of scale, I have to have very large plants, which basically might require me to be a really big operator. I am a new entrant. I don't have this particular side. There might be also network effects in which if you have lots of interconnected customers, that's what really works well. I'm a new entrant. I'm the only person here. People are not coming to me because their friends and the people they know are not connected to this, or therefore I don't really have the ability to enter. Customer switching costs. They know how to operate. They have a relationship. Their product of competitors works well with the way in which they are doing things. They have already invested in understanding the product. They are not willing to start a new or buy from another company. It might be very costly, associated with economies of scale. I need a lot of money to start operating. In some cases, it might be a technology story. I need to create a new innovation, and this takes a lot of money. And then there is also companies that are already well established. They have the relationships with the customers, the distributors. It's really difficult to basically crack into the industry. And then in some cases, the government restricts and they issue certain licenses, and this is the number of licenses. These are the number of licenses we have, and that's it. I want to enter, there are no more licenses. It's not possible for me to go in. In some cases, yes, there might be barriers to entry that are relatively low, but if I enter, incumbents are going to react. As I enter, I start operating, then they drop the prices, and all of a sudden I'm completely unprofitable. Or they try to basically push distributors not to supply to me, which is illegal, by the way, or suppliers. So it can get into lots of different interesting interactions, competitive interactions that basically, as a new entrant, even though they're making a lot of money for a period of time, there is no money to be made. I'm not able to operate. I basically have to close shop. So other alternatives, well, there might be lots of substitutes. Yes, lots of money being made in the industry because there is very little competition. They accommodate each other, but all of a sudden, if this is the case, maybe substitutes are going to be the ones that are going to undermine this. What is a substitute? A product that serves the similar function, but is not quite as good. And this is important to separate substitute from products that are competitors. Threats of new entrants, I'm going to offer the same product. Substitute the products is different. And to some extent, I'm not willing to use it because this is offering my services that I want. But if the price of the current product is too high, I will use it. Very basic example, sugar. Sugars have certain properties, and it's good to use it in food. However, if the price of sugar is relatively high, we can always go to high fructose corn syrup. Might not be as good as sugar, but some cases, some consumers might not like it, but it's going to be basically a nice substitute for some of the applications. So this is a story. It might be attractive in terms of the performance price trade-off, and the buyers have low switching costs. So I'm using sugar for these products. The market doesn't really care much about it. Okay, I'm going to use the cheaper alternative. So these are forces that all of a sudden are competing away the value that is created in the company, in the industry. And then what we have is power of suppliers and power of buyers. They can compete away through direct negotiation because they are really powerful. And it's kind of, oh, you're making a lot of money. That's really nice, but we are also very powerful. Why don't you provide us with some of the value that you have created? Because there are very few suppliers. So if they are highly concentrated, you don't really have the ability to buy from many alternatives, and they might basically impose higher prices. Companies within the industry, not a particular company, but in general, companies within the industry will have to pay more, and therefore the profitability comes down. And the suppliers depend little on the industry. They have the power. If you say, oh, I'm not going to buy from you, then they say, well, it's not a problem. You're not pretty much that relevant for me. Then you end up having to come back to them. Again, the story of switching costs, you can move around from different alternative products, and therefore it's not going to be something that enables you to negotiate things with them. And then they offer something that is differentiated. So I don't really have many alternatives. It's connected with the switching cost. I have to buy that particular product. I need it for my production process. And then the final one is that if they think that, look, there is a lot of profitability, you are pushing too hard to negotiate with me, they might decide, okay, then I'm going to just enter the industry. I'm going to start operating this vertical integration, and then I'm going to compete against you. So these are the forces that enable suppliers to basically extract value from the industry, depressing the profitability within the industry. Then finally, the power of buyers. The story is similar. Highly concentrated and differentiated, switching costs, the idea that they can negotiate concessions from industry players, or that price is pretty much what determines their ability to choose, and therefore this is important for them. They are going to try to push and negotiate for lower prices. I have pressure all from the next segment of my customers that are basically buying on the basis of price, and therefore I'm going to try to push that price pressure to my suppliers, in case of buyers going to the competitors. And then the buyer, the quality is not really affected. This is not important for me, and it's not important for me on cost. And therefore, I might be able to just compete away some of the profitability generated in the industry. And then I might also decide maybe I just want to backward integrate in some cases. So the idea here is profitability in the industry is determined by the level of rivalry. A good industry, very little rivalry. A good industry also requires that it's difficult for new companies to enter the industry and offer similar products. It's also difficult for subsidies. They are not the same products. They are different products, but can, to some extent, cover the needs of the products in the industry. And then power of buyers and suppliers, they have little power to negotiate and extract concessions. The two final, if you want, influences, government and complementary products and services, regulation, which we already saw in the case of, for example, the threat of entry, which is a limitation, might drive the level of profitability. Government might impose new regulations or create particular conditions that enable companies to make a lot of money or reduce that ability to do that. They can give a monopoly to some, or they can basically protect others from foreign competition. And in the case of technological changes and the growth, it might basically drive everything that is happening. New technology, completely new entrants, completely new competitors, buyers and suppliers basically change. So there is going to be some evolution here. And that's to understand this, how do we start the story? How do we apply this framework? First of all, what is the industry? Going back to the discussion before, how widely are we going to define the industry? From the example we had before, is the industry cinema chains or the cinemas and television, or do we go also into other entertainment, outside entertainment, restaurants, or do we go basically into a really broad discussion? And the narrower it is, the easier the analysis is. As we go broader, everything becomes more complicated, but at the same time, if it is too narrow, we might be missing insights that come from how consumers perceive products to be serving similar needs. Then from there, we have to identify who are the participants, who are the competitors within the industry, who are the buyers, who are the suppliers, potential new entrants, and the substitutes, and then analyze it. One way to do it is basically try to add some measures to all the list of factors, and maybe it becomes qualitative, so it's kind of degrees of importance from 1 to 5, so that we can add a sense of importance of the different forces. And then overall, what happens? What is the level of profitability? Which are the forces that really matter and drive this, and what might happen over the long run if there are technological changes, or it's going to be changes in regulation and things like this. And then finally, what we can do, what competitors can do, and then design the particular strategies that we may be able to implement. With, again, the reminder, this is a context level analysis, and if you run this, you should be able to run it similarly for different companies. It is then your decision, if you're running a company with your conditions, to basically implement different types of strategies, find a niche in which others are not playing, or try to basically exclude others and try to push for barriers to entry, try to negotiate better with customers or with buyers, things like this. So that's it. Remember, industry analysis restricted for the most part to a geographic space so that we can understand the factors that drive it. It's a story of competition, it's a story of profitability. The industry is the set of competitors that customers perceive as offering something that covers similar needs. And then the story is apply the analysis to understand the average industry within the industry. Is it going to be profitable? How profitable the company is going to be? And then what can we do in terms of understanding other forces? Ideal situation, highly profitable because there is little rivalry, high barriers to entry, very few substitutes, and buyers and suppliers have very little power. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.